Right on. Okay. Welcome everybody to today's webinar, eliminating downtime and uncertainty with a smarter solution. Right. So ideally, my name is Corey Dockendorf. I am a senior solutions architect here at Platform SH. I am joined today by my colleague Michael Riley. But before
Hello.
we dive in, I want to do a quick introduction for myself. So I've been in the industry for the better part of some 20 odd years in the tech industry, worked anything from aerospace to managed service providers to platform as a service. So ran the gambit. I've been the guy that's on the support floor for a while, and that was a lot of fun. So looking forward to having this conversation today and bantering back and forth with Mike here and talking about a couple things that maybe you as customers or potential tech folk have experienced in the past. And Mike, would you like to introduce yourself to the audience?
Hi, I'm Michael Riley. I'm from the elite support team at Platform SH in the Americas. I've been a seasoned system administrator for around 6 to 7 years now, working on Linux systems, deep in the trenches.
So you at least had the joy of doing the Linux stuff. I used to be a Windows guy, and that was, yeah, that was rough. It was rough.
Oh, I've definitely done that too, so
Yeah.
don't worry.
So great. So today we're planning on tackling 3 specific critical challenges that are facing IT leaders today, right? Those 3, one is the lack of visibility with traditional hosting providers today, scaling infrastructure without drowning in the complexity and all the stuff that comes along with it, and then keeping your IT team focused, productive, and the most important thing, well rested. If you're struggling with any of these issues, you're definitely not alone, obviously, because we're already telling you all about it. But by the end of this session, hopefully you'll have some practical insights on how the right platform approach can really transform your operations and really make your company run more efficiently with less stress and more rest at the end of the day. So let's dive in. First thing, why IT leaders are moving away from hosting providers that keep them in the dark. This blows my mind because we are in a world where transparency and visibility is key, right? Traditional hosting providers often operate like black boxes, right? So you know something's happening there, but you can't see what. You have no numbers based off of it. It's just acting up. And this lack of transparency really creates like serious business problems because now you can't see what's happening with the infrastructure. Troubleshooting becomes a guessing game, and then issues that could be resolved in minutes drag on for hours, days. I mean, we've seen customers, or not customers, but we've seen companies lose thousands of dollars in revenue during outages simply because they don't know what's going on, right? So, I mean, it's difficult if you can't see what's the problem and you can't pinpoint it, the source of the problem, you can't resolve it, right? So, like some of the times, like Mike, what are some of the common visibility issues you've seen with IT teams struggling with?
Not having any visibility into metrics is a big one. Not being able to see resources with the typical like traditional hosting, GoDaddy, stuff like that, where you may be able to see some of the CPU, but you don't really get those in-depth metrics.
Yeah, that becomes problematic, and it's not even just about troubleshooting either, right? It's about planning, right? Without having comprehensive monitoring and reporting and being able to see what is actually happening on the infrastructure layer, how can you make informed decisions about capacity? How can you make decisions about security or optimization? Right? You can't optimize what you don't know is not optimized, right?
Right.
So that can become problematic. So the other thing with that is like with modern PaaSes, and this is why I think this is interesting, like, cloud application platforms today and PaaS solutions are fundamentally changing this dynamic, right? Because now they're providing, Platform SH as well and Upsun are providing real-time dashboards. This is huge, right? Now we have like detailed logging, we have performance metrics, and it gives you a complete picture of your environment, top to bottom. And if you're not using one today, go out and get one. There's plenty of them, right?
Yep.
And that's always very interesting because it really tempers the expectations for that transparency change. over the past couple of years is like, oh, now I can see what's happening. Now I do know. I don't have to worry about digging through a bunch of logs, throwing this one out and throwing that one out, or throwing it into some ingestion system and saying, what's broke, right?
Right.
And you work with
And
a lot of our elite customers. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, obviously, like showing the transparency and like trying to give them a good idea of what's happening very quickly early on into an outage is very crucial. They have tons of stakeholders they need to address. Um, it's not like a it's not like a easy thing to do when having to constantly tell them I don't know what's going on. Our providers keeping us in the dark. We don't do that. We try to be very transparent and tell them if we don't know what the current situation is, what's happening, we tell them we're actively investigating it. If we have any inkling and what may be causing the issue, we may, depending on what the issue is, we may give them some additional information, but we tend to try to stick to the facts, so that they can give the facts to their stakeholders.
And that's really like the evolution of transparency. Like that is the expectation now. There, I still don't understand how companies can work with other companies for their IT needs. I don't know is not an answer. If you don't know and I don't know, how do I fix it? Right? Like how I need
Exactly.
guidance, I need help, right? And if you're going to give me a black box or something that I can't actually operate with, I need you to tell me. You have to tell me because I
Exactly.
can't fix it, right?
Exactly. Even some providers are kind of like their support teams are kind of instructed not to tell them everything, depending on the company. We're not going to be saying names here, obviously, but and when I started in the industry, that was some of the things that we were kind of taught that I had to break out of when I first started your platform. Uh, One of our core values is transparency, and that that's something that really does distinguish us from the traditional web hosts.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. This is something that I learned back when I was working at another managed service provider. What that when you're on the floor and you're the support person trying to help these customers, be transparent, be honest, give them facts, don't give them fluff, right? Let them know what it is because the faster and more accurate you can provide that support, the faster and quicker they can resolve it. And then trying to also give them, more power to the player, right? Hey, you know what? Maybe you don't need to open a support ticket because you have access to a dashboard. Maybe you don't need to open a support ticket because you can see something is happening, right? So these are things that are very important to have. And we're again, to Mike's point, big on transparency here. So providing not only that assistance and that help, but also having those dashboards and having those numbers and having those that data from 30 days or 60 days or 90 days and being able to make those estimated decisions, right? So and that's very important these days. And I think a lot of people are still of the old mindset of like, I'll do it myself, I'll just go in there and figure it out. But if your hands are tied, you can only do so much, and I think that's a large headache that's happening today.
Definitely.
One of the examples that I wanted to talk about, which I thought was really cool. So Symphony.com, they actually increased the performance of their site. You may be familiar with the little PHP app called Symphony. It's crazy.
Yep.
But they actually leveraged Blackfire monitoring, right? And that's something that we do here. And that they were able to actually increase the performance of the site by almost 3 times, right? Just by getting the data. Like, didn't even have to do anything. Just said, hey, let's take a look. Let's see what's going on. And they were having issues specifically like with SQL queries, right? Finding bottlenecks, which, let's be clear, if it's SQL queries, it's probably a bottleneck in the first place. So you probably want to be able to see as much of that
Yep.
information as possible. And then being able to see that, taking that data, measuring that data, and then seeing what the impact is on a fix with that data. And then by doing a simple thing like just caching a single one SQL query, they increase their site performance by 3. One query. How long would a normal dev or a normal support or assist admin or SRE take to have to dig through everything on the site to figure that out versus just having a dashboard that says, hey, change this. Right?
Yep. Blackfire really does open that world of opportunity, trying to identify those bottlenecks.
Yeah.
That is something that we, as a support team, do have to look at in terms of queries, whether it may cause an outage or slow your site down to a crawl.
Yes.
Because it's not able to serve traffic because queries are in flight, or it may even worse, stuck in some points.
That's the other thing, right? We always talk about, well, what happens if it's non-performant? What happens if it's just not working? Right? Like it's just dead in the water, but you can't see that. So you don't, I mean, the age old Java problem, or, what was the Cold Fusion? Remember, I used to work with Cold Fusion, and those that remember those days, that thing would get stuck all the time. Like for whatever reason, it would just give up and be like, nah, that's enough. I've reached my memory threshold. I'm just not going to work anymore. But if you don't have like something to counteract and say, oh, this is stuck and not working. Oh, alert, danger, Will Robinson, I need to fix this. How do you know? Your site, you're being dinged for something that probably could have required a service restart. But how do you know? Well, you got to wait hours to try and figure that out. You got to wait until a support ticket is open to figure that out. That's not fair.
A lot of places don't have that luxury either.
Yeah, exactly.
Depending on whether you even have a maintenance period. Some sites that may be running regional traffic where maybe they might be able to pull off maintenance during the night. Other big sites don't have that luxury where they're online 24/7.
Yeah.
And again, back to the stakeholders, you have them breathing down your neck for updates, or even they might even refuse a maintenance request.
Yeah, absolutely. And then guess what? You're just stuck. And this also, like with e-commerce configurations, could you imagine something like that happening on a Black Friday? Probably like one of your most powerful days, and something's stuck. Well, what's stuck? I don't know. Every minute you don't know, you're losing money.
Exactly.
Right? So
we try to push APM as a concept, even if it's not Blackfire.
Anything.
If you have anything already, if you have a New Relic subscription for something, and you may not have the APM package available, add it.
Just get something. Anything. And again, we also talk about like from not just performance metrics, but also from like planning and expanding, right? And being able to do that and make those changes. And that's like, now we know that we're growing, we're getting bigger, we're getting, we're exponentially every year going 15 times or 20 times larger. That's great. How do you know how much you need? How many more resources? Are you doubling? Are you tripling? Are you quadrupling? How do you know what that looks like? Again, having those metrics are very important to be able to see, to have that and see that and get that information. So
transient issues that occur under a certain load are also something you need to look at.
100%
is great for identifying.
Absolutely. And this is again why these IT leaders are looking at this and going, we got to move away. We can't work on these dark black boxes and not do anything with them. Like it's not beneficial to the company. It's not beneficial to your teams, and it just really staggers not just performance but also growth. So let's talk about the next one. I think we've killed that one enough. Let's talk about scaling, right? So how to scale and optimize infrastructure without adding complexity. And that's always fun to talk about. Like, I'm going to add things, but I'm going to try and make it not complex. So it's like every time you add something to the rubber band ball, it becomes more complex. Like you can't get around it. But with that traditional approach, scaling is pretty much, need more capacity, add more servers. Need more performance, add more components, right? You add more performance, you need more hardware. Throw hardware at it. That was the old mentality, right? Throw more hardware at it. What's my Kubernetes cluster doing? Throw more nodes at it. We'll just keep going until it just grows exponentially, and then I don't know what I'm running anymore. So before you know it, you end up having infrastructure which resembles like a Rube Goldberg machine, technically functional, but ridiculously complex. And then this goes back to that troubleshooting piece. It's like, well, what's broken? This piece of duct tape that's over here. Well, what were we using the duct tape for? It was a long time since we used that duct tape. Not so sure, but I'm sure if I rip it off, half of the machine, I will have MacGyvered this thing and half of it will fall apart. So what do I do with that? So
You
with
take
them,
away that tape. You take away
yeah,
that tape, and you find a big gaping hole where it just used
every
to be a
time.
tiny crack.
Every time, and you're like, oh, should use spackle, right? So but the modern PaaS approach and the cloud application platform approach, this flips the script, right? You leverage automation, you look as infrastructure as code, so you're looking at it just the same way you would do with your Git repository. It's intelligent orchestration that scales resources without scaling complexity, scaling up and scaling down. That's another big one, right? Everybody wants to go and get bigger. Nobody ever talks about going smaller, reducing back to what you were. Why be on 9 nodes when you really only need 3? You only needed 9 nodes for a couple days or maybe a week. You don't need them for the entire month, year. So that becomes that bloat that a lot of the hyperscalers are seeing, where they'll upsize you into oblivion. However, you may not need that on a Tuesday in the middle of like May. So, and that's very interesting, because instead of manually provisioning a lot of these new servers when traffic increases, that's usually the biggest one, right? Traffic is always
Or air rate.
or error rate, right? Those are two of the big reasons that having the right platform can actually automatically scale those resources based on demand patterns, then scale them back down when they're no longer needed without any of your intervention, right? If this happens on a Saturday, I'm not panicking about it because it's okay. The infrastructure is going to increase and decrease as necessary. And then also having the support team behind it for whatever provider you're using that has human eyes on that. We can't rely everything on automation because, again, it is still only code. So it's only as good as you can write it. But having human eyes and human interaction to say, yes, we are scaling because this is valid traffic. We are scaling because this is an event. We are scaling to make sure that the customers are remaining online as much as humanly possible. That's key. And again, goes back to my previous comment, I don't know is not an answer. Well, why aren't we scaling properly? Is something stuck? I don't know. We're looking into it. The longer you look into it, the longer I'm down, then that's costing me money. So, and I'm sure, again, Mike, you've probably seen scaling challenges that have probably proven most difficult, error rates, whatnot. Um, how do when those happen, like what is the, first off, what's the customer like most of the time? Probably in a panic at that point. And then
Yeah.
how are we usually helping them in that?
Keeping an eye on the auto scale process. So our internal tools will alert an engineer if anything were to go wrong during the upsize process in general. It doesn't even necessarily have to be auto scaling. If you request more resources and something happens during that process, it alerts the on-call engineer. There's eyes on it, even during the weekend. We keep a close eye on that type of stuff.
Yeah, and
Because
that's
your
yeah,
resources are
huge.
paramount.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's also interesting, like this goes back to like the support piece and that support conversation. I think it's interesting. Like I've seen other providers that have said like, yeah, sure. Are you 24/7? They're like, nah, we'll cover you 24/7 during the week. Saturday, Sunday, we're 9 to 5. Well, what happens after 5 o'clock? Am I watching
There,
it? Are you watching it? Whose turn is it?
yeah,
that's concerning.
it's definitely an awkward question
It
for
is.
any stakeholder that isn't aware of it.
Yeah. What do you?
I've had
Yeah.
that happen a couple times.
Like it's the idea. It's blows my mind. The idea to have that after 5 p.m. Like, am I the 5 to 9 guy? Is that my job? Am I just going to stay up and wait for something to happen? Hopefully, we've already implemented monitoring and optimization, so I'm not worried about it as much. But still, I would like to, whoever my provider is going to be, I'm going to make sure that like I need that support. I need to be able, I should be on this all the time as much as humanly possible. Again, 24/7, 365, that's a realistic number. And from a support perspective, that should be the expectation. And if not, I'm just doing most of it, the work myself, or doing it during the time that they're not doing it, right? So that becomes cumbersome for IT departments today.
Yep.
So I think that when evaluating like a scaling solution specifically, it's critical to ask whether it will add unnecessary complexity to your environment. That's a big one. Like, sure, anybody can scale, but what does it do to my app? What does it do? What is being added in that I now have to manage, someone else has to manage. If I lose a team member for whatever reason, say they won the lottery and they leave, great. How quick can I teach somebody? How quick can I spin somebody up? Or am I using old primal knowledge of like, hey, this one guy that's been here for the past 20 years, he knows why this all works and does whatever. If he leaves because he retires or he's just done, has that tribal knowledge been pushed off? Is that written down? Do you have a document? Do you have the complexities written down and cleared up and documented well? Because if not, it's crazy. Everybody's leaving my house today, right in the middle of my webinar. It's great. Goodbye. But at the same time, yeah, I know, barking dogs. I love online meetings. They're my favorite thing in the world. But in all things, these are the things that people need to consider, right? It's like, well, what happens if, right? And these are some examples are, will this require specialized knowledge, right? That tribal knowledge. If I add these new scaling complexities, will it introduce new failure points, right? Because we're adding new things, we're adding scaling, we're adding pieces. That means that there's also points that can obviously fail as well. Do I need to duct tape those now? Do I need to duct tape them later? Do I even know what they are? Right? And then will it make troubleshooting more difficult? And this goes back to the duct tape at the end of the Rube Goldberg machine. If I pull it off, what am I going to find? Right? And when I do find it, now how am I troubleshooting it? Do I have the means? Do I have the metrics? Do I have the optimization recommendations? I don't know. I might. So that's what I look like when I look like at providers. I look for those type of evaluation criteria, right? So what I was going to ask you, Mike. So in your experience, like, can you give me like one or two optimization techniques that pretty much deliver or outsize benefits without introducing too many complexities?
So some people might not realize it, but we do have autoscaler as an option, and you can use it on your staging environments. Generally, when you're onboarded, what would probably be the ideal scenario is to determine what auto-scaling parameters you need before your site goes live on Platform SH or Upsun, and to once you get those parameters set, you just have to keep an eye on your application's resource footprint, because the way that our we define a range of how many resources can be upsized to or downsized to. What is the minimum and maximum, basically? And if that need to change for whatever reason, you need to obviously keep an eye on that and do testing of your applications every once in a while to make sure that the parameters are correct. Your staging environment can be very key for this. Do some load testing, which may not be representative of what traffic you may be receiving, but it should be able to give a decent picture of what to maybe expect. And nothing's perfect. You may have to change the knobs a little bit and adjust, but once you have that perfect setup, it just works.
Yeah, I like that. It just works. That's my favorite line in the world. Like, it just works. I believe that's Apple's tagline, is it just works. And then they like plug the magic mouse into something ridiculous and you're like, sure. But this at the same time and you make a very good point in regards to like implementing these pieces and parts within your standard workflow, right? I don't always test my code, but when I do it in production. We don't do that. We want to make sure you're actually utilizing proper staging and development environments, and you're doing those tests, and you're making sure that everything is clear and concise before you ever get to production. This not only gives you the leeway and the foresight to know what's going to happen within your production environment, but it also makes it so that there's no surprises, right? You don't have to push something and go, oh, well, we've added complexity. We don't know what it's going to do. We get to production. Oh, look, it did a whole bunch of things we didn't want it to do. Now we got to do it again. And then this becomes iterative. And this also then builds out backlog, right? Now you've created more problems to catch up on. And this really stifles innovation, right? This stifles going forward and optimizing, because you have all of these pieces of duct tape that you have to go fix. You have all of this stuff that you should decide whether it's spackle or not. And that's honestly where backlog comes from, right? We all get that, oh, I have to do this but I have another priority, so I'm going to do something else. But if you're actually testing and iterating throughout that process and throughout that workflow, this doesn't become an issue. And then also having and we talk about this with Blackfire IO, having those metrics and optimization recommendations on top of your staging and development environments. Again, we're getting rid of those black boxes. We're not just saying, hey, we're going to throw this in dev and see how it works. We're going to look at it and then we're going to measure it and we're going to see what it's going to do. That way, when we get to production, it should work the same way and those metrics should match. And now you have less to worry about and you have less to catch up on. So again, those are those pieces that are very, very important and work together to be able to optimize and make your teams efficient, your application efficient, and keep our C levels happy because we're keeping everything up and running. And then the scaling piece on top of that, right? You need to know that when that scaling is coming, what that's going to look like and what the metrics are around it. Again, measure, measure twice, cut once, right? So that's the deal here. And that's very important to keep that workflow. And this is when we talk about running infrastructure as code, like within the same way as like all of that mentality, all of those workflows should apply the same way today. And with that, I think we're going to go to our last topic, and this is my favorite topic because I used to be this guy. And you are this guy, Mike. I hope you're sleeping. But
I've done it on both ends.
Yeah.
Both from running in a business,
Mhm.
depending on like I think it was GoDaddy at the time.
Sure.
And then seen it from the other side from working on the platform support team.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this topic is choosing the right platform, which allows your IT team to stay focused, productive, and I will say well rested, right? You don't need the poor guy up 24 hours a day, right? You don't need the one guy that is the only one that knows how to run anything. Like this is important because again, the mental health of your IT team is pretty much just going to keep you going and maintain their happiness, right? So this is the human side of the IT operations, right? There's a hidden productivity. There's a hidden productivity tax that comes with managing complex infrastructure, constant context switching, alert fatigue. That is a thing. Please don't send me 1,000 emails at 3 o'clock in the morning because something went wrong, right? The dreaded 3 a.m. wake up calls. I've been on that side of the house. I've done both. To your point, Mike, I've been the guy that has to call you at 3 a.m., but I've also been the guy that has been woken up at 3 a.m. And trust me, neither of those people are happy. It's just
Exactly.
Nobody likes 3 o'clock. I don't want to call you. You don't want me to call you. That's how it works. So we've all seen the consequences of this human factor, right? We see the burnout, we see turnover, and teams that spend so much time maintaining systems, not innovating, not building, they don't have energy for that. They're maintaining. And this makes it so that your application lifecycle becomes stagnant. And everybody goes, well, why don't you just move to the next version of XYZ? I'd love to, but we're still trying to mitigate the last update, right? We're still trying to figure out that last thing. And then that just stacks and that stacks and that stacks. And even having large existential IT teams, it's still going to happen. It's still someone's going to be doing, I'm going to do a feature update. I'm working on my production environment. Everything is great. Left hand isn't talking to the right. Let's push. Everything's broken. We've added complexity. What do we do now? Back to the drawing board. We go back to the conversation, etc. So, but having the right cloud application platform means that you can fundamentally change this equation, right? Features like self-healing infrastructure is a big deal, right? Intelligent alerting, right? That reduces noise. Don't give me an alert for everything. Tell me when things are broken. Don't just tell me, I don't need an email every 5-10 minutes. It's like, oh, everything's running fine. Everything's fine here. Thank you. Everything's fine. And how are you? I don't need that in my life.
Yeah.
And then automation of routine tasks, right? We live in a world, and I'm going to say it, we live in a world of AI. We live in a world of automation. We live in a world where things can be, menial tasks can just be set up routinely. Use that. Don't have the one person that's like, what is your job? Don't be the Homer Simpson that your job is to push the button, because that could be automated. Just automate that task. Then that person who has a skill set can work on something else. and progress the project, progress the application. And that it really can change how your team works, right? It makes them work faster and more efficiently, right? And that's the big point. That's what we want to get to, is we want to be able to run efficient and run and not do those menial tasks. So with that being in mind, this is the thing that I'm going to ask you, Mike. How do we measure metrics for the human aspect?
So depending on whether it's a smaller team size always kind of, there's going to be different approaches. If you're running a worldwide site, obviously the way you measure metrics is going to be a little bit different. So I like to, what I did before was measure time to resolution in terms of, and as well as the frequency of alerts. Your monitoring solution is a big key metric when trying to measure what your team is spending time doing. Are they spending time fixing stuff that is constantly appearing one after another, daily, weekly, monthly? How long does it take to fix it? How much time are you wasting on system performance that should otherwise be spent on maybe improving the system or other tasks? Like for small teams in particular, sometimes it falls to the developer. Sometimes you don't even have a dedicated sysadmin for it. And when I worked on a small team, I was the sysadmin, and then there was a developer who was also my manager at the time. If I wasn't available, it all fell on him. And what would sometimes happen when I'm not around or I was absent on vacation for something, he wouldn't spend nearly as much time on developing. Rather, he'd be doing sysadmin work and working on other types of issues that may pop up.
Yeah, definitely. And that becomes that ROI piece, right? That ROI of not just the application and the platform itself, but the team's productivity, right? How long are we keeping these guys around here? And what are they doing? What are they working on? Are they just doing the same thing over and over? Are they just doing the menial tasks, like you said, the system administration tasks that probably don't need to be done or can be done in an automated fashion? And then going to work on something else or working on system pieces that matter and are going to leverage the application rather than, again, that backlog, right? So, and then of course you do this, then this increases team productivity, this increases retention rates, right? And so all of that has to look like from a business perspective of an ROI, especially as an IT team, because we all know everybody's going to ask the budget, be like, why do you need more help? Why do you need more help? Well, if you're asking for more help to do menial tasks, that doesn't make any sense. But if you're asking for more help because you're progressing the product, that's a different conversation. And that's the conversation need to be had.
Or the other question that usually comes with it: why is this other stuff getting delayed?
Oh,
what are you spending your time on doing?
Oh,
and then you have to explain to it. Walking into a new business, like your first couple weeks,
sure,
and then having to explain to them like why you need all this new stuff, and just explaining what state you found it in, that they weren't even aware of.
That's the other one. Like you end up with a new employee that comes in and sits down and goes, why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? And then digging and digging and digging. And the other thing that I hate, outside of we don't know when I ask a question, can't stand that. But the other piece that I can't stand is when they say, we've always done it this way. And you're like, so you're just not going to change anything? You're not going to get better, faster, stronger? Well, we've always done it this way. There's 1,000 ways to knit a sweater. Like, let's try something different. Like let's figure out a way to make this better, or make this process better, or reduce the time on and those bottlenecks. I'm gonna drop a book name, but I haven't done this in a while. There's a great book, especially like within DevOps piece, called The Phoenix Project. This book is fantastic. If you're working in DevOps or working in IT, highly suggest this book, because it explains, like, when you're looking at it, you're like, we've always done it this way, and then start really analyzing those bottlenecks and removing those bottlenecks out of your DevOps workflow can save you so much time. And you'll find processes that are 5-6 years old and go, well, technology has moved significantly and has solved for that. We should fix that now. We should automate that now. We should build in that better, that intelligent learning, right? Thanks, Travis. But yeah, it's a great book, but it explains how DevOps thinks. And you go, why is this? We're trying to, funnel everything through this small head. And you're like, well, why don't you increase the size? Oh, that's genius. But we've always done it this way. Well, let's just see what happens. And that's a really big piece from a team productivity, because again, you're eliminating those menial tasks and you're making it so that you can have a sustainable IT operation going forward, right? So these are a couple of things that I like to really lean on, like, is think of your IT department and think of the ROI based off of it. And that's how you measure the human perspective of your DevOps team. Happy IT, happy life. I mean, they're really the guys that are controlling the app at this point. So,
Especially
and then
if
they
you
get
want
to
to keep
sleep.
them happy.
Yeah. And then we get to the well-rested piece, right? And this goes back to the conversation of having a weekend or having a provider that only provides support till 5 p.m. Well, someone has to be up from 5 p.m. till 9 a.m. Great. Guess who that's going to most likely be? Your IT team. Well, we talk about well-rested. We want them to sleep, right? If something happens, I want to know that my support team, with whoever my provider is looking at it, actively making sure that it is working properly. And if it doesn't require my attention and can be solved and resolved back on Monday, great. Let's make that happen. I don't need 3 o'clock in the morning so someone to tell me that we're having a lot of traffic because something happened, or something happened in the middle of the night and my site's now blowing up. Great. It should auto scale. It should scale up and manage that traffic with human eyes, making sure that's working properly. Great. And then on Monday, I check my email. It's like, hey, we had to upsize you based off this traffic. Here's just the facts of why we did this and verified that it is valid traffic. Great. And then we scaled you back down on Monday. Fantastic. I had a lovely sleep on Saturday evening, woke up on Sunday, bright, bushy-tailed, and look forward to Monday, right? That's the piece that you need from your support perspective, is that you should let those automated tasks happen. And on the weekends, not have to worry about, well, who's up 3 o'clock in the morning getting the call? Am I giving you the call? Are you waiting for the call? Nobody wants a 3 o'clock in the morning call.
No one does.
And it's always funny because it's 3 o'clock in the morning. This is my favorite thing. 3 o'clock in the morning is always the bar. I don't know what happens at 3 o'clock. It's like the witching hour. Something happens at 3 o'clock and all IT breaks. It's never like midnight. Like, I've never gotten a call at like 10. It's always 3 a.m. And I'm like, okay, that works. I don't know if there's mystery around it, but maybe someone write a book on that. So alongside this, right, a couple of different things is, with this also would affect like on-call rotations. That's another big one, right? How, if you've ever worked at MSP, Mike, you've seen this before, those on-call rotations of these people coming in and out, right? I'm on call this time on. Well, if you have a good support system and you have those automation and scaling pieces, your on-call shrinks, right? You don't have to worry about it. Yeah, you got to be on call, but you're not answering the 3 o'clock in the morning call because you know it's going to work. And only if it's a serious issue, again, that goes back to our teams becoming more productive and optimizing and making things better. You're optimizing, you're making it better, you're measuring this stuff. You don't get 3 o'clock in the morning calls because you've spent the time to make your application better, more resilient, and you have a provider giving you all the infrastructure help in the background. Great.
Right.
It's a team effort.
Yep.
Yeah. And then all of that is benefit for your teams and the company as a whole. So, yeah. So right now we're coming up to about 1:40 my time. I don't know. That's how time works. 1:38, I guess. What I wanted to do is I wanted to see if there were any questions from the audience, anything about anything we've touched on today with these 3 topics. We had a lot. Oh, okay, great. What are some examples that you've seen of unrealized ROI or value brought to IT teams that may have left platform upside? Oh, this is a fun one, Mike. I'm going to leave this one to you. So the question is, what are some examples that you have seen of unrealized ROI or value brought to IT teams that may have left platform upside and then came back? Mike, I leave it to you.
So we've seen sometimes with customers where they're obviously upset, or their stakeholders may be pushing their hand to leave, not realizing how much potential value that we bring. We had one particular customer that this happened. They left us. We helped them migrate off on good terms, and we always try to do it on good terms. And when we got about 8 months later, they came back asking us about coming back, and the reason for it was because they realized the amount of staff they would have to hire to maintain the AWS cluster on call as well. Most people don't realize, like, okay, the people that you hire may be able to do on call, but as we said throughout this webinar, it's the other time zones, EMEA, APAC. You may not be covering those time zones, and then the cost just balloons up to where you probably be getting more value proposition from us, or be even significantly more having to hire staff or an MSP to manage that. Um, Ultimately, that's what ended up happening, and they came back to us. We sat down with them to any grievances they had. We took them to heart. We started coming up with a plan to get them on pretty much the best plan we can get them on. And at the end of the day, they're a very happy customer. We interact with them a lot. We've had very little complaints. It's been a smooth transition. And that's not the only time that that's happened. We've had that happen multiple times where people have come back realizing the value proposition.
Yeah, and that's another thing, right? We talked about adding complexity to the application. Sometimes you're like, hey, you know what? We're going to go do something new elsewhere. You leave, right? And in this instance with Platform and Upsun, you now have added complexity because you've removed an entire layer of support, infrastructure management, edge layer management, all of these things. That's now your problem, and now that becomes talking to a new provider. Is this something different? Can it do the same thing? If it can't do the same thing, what am I changing? How does that add into my app? How is that controlled? Who is managing it? Who's supporting it? Oh, you don't have that feature? Great. Now I have to find another alternative and I have to do it. And again, adding that complexity to the application, causing more dilemmas than necessary. So sometimes we see those customers that they go, oh, I'm going to try this instead. And even on my side, on the solution side, we've had customers that have gone off and come to us and gone through the whole process and wanted to come to Platform, but decided to go somewhere else, or they were going to just do it themselves. And I guarantee you, 6 months to 8 months later, they come back and they go, "Hey, so we tried that. Was not as great as we thought it was going to be. You guys still open to take us on?" And then we have the conversation of like, yes, we can help you. And this is, and when you see that benefit, and then in your point, Mike, those people that are really have the benefit and have it good and then leave, they realize, oh, this is a pain. And then that's when the benefits come in. But that shouldn't be where the benefit, you should not have to leave something to figure out what the benefits are. You should know, like, this is a good spot to be in. This is nailing my boxes for what it needs to do. And that's saving me time, money, and space. And that's the most important thing.
Yeah, most don't realize that, like, developers are not Kubernetes system admins. Kubernetes and other types of those frameworks add a lot of complexity, and you essentially have to hire a completely different person just to handle that, even an entire team separate from the developers. And most don't have that on standby.
No,
that knowledge.
No. Come later in the year and they're like, oh, we've already gone through our budget. Great. Now you need to hire a team. I don't have budget for that. So someone's got to do it. And that becomes problematic. We see there's also the discussion of like, what happens if you don't have a large IT team? What if we've seen customers that like the communications team or the marketing team is they're handling the app or the site or whatever, and they may be somewhat technical and can handle most of that. But if you say, now I need you to manage the DevOps, now I need you to manage the infrastructure. How do you know about CDNs? What do you know about CDNs? This is a different subset of like talent. And you're like, it's your problem now. And that becomes difficult because now you have a very steep learning curve for somebody that may not want to do that.
Yeah, we manage the CDN too. Most probably won't consider that either.
No, and that's the web application firewall. Like these are things at the edge layer. Like the whole top to bottom infrastructure as the more of it you can have managed and the more of it you can have support around, the less you have to do anything about it, and the more time you can spend focusing on your application and optimization, right?
Yep.
And then throw an APM in there, and then you really have a whole lot of space. So could you give 3 tips for orgs vetting providers in terms of support when they're looking to engage a new provider? Ooh, good question. Yes. Support and SLAs. That's a big one, right? Because I know that there are a lot of customers out there that are going and they're like, well, what does that look like? The difference between a 99.9% SLA versus a 99.99% SLA is about 8 hours, right? I think so that really becomes how much downtime can you afford and how often will that downtime occur? That's a big one that you should talk to. So when having a conversation with a provider, how much do I have to worry about? And should downtime occur, how fast can I get back online? That's a big one.
Another thing that you mentioned that I wasn't even aware of, I think it was a couple of weeks ago,
Mm-hmm.
some providers limit the amount of tickets you can open in a month.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
I didn't even realize that was a thing. It just seems so counterproductive.
Sure.
Being
they're
afraid to ask
limits.
questions.
Yeah. Well, again, I don't know. So if you don't know, don't need to open a ticket, I guess. But that's another thing that you should check in. See if there are any limits on that support interaction, right? Seeing if there are limits on how often you can open tickets, when that support is happening. Is it 24/7, 365, or are there limitations and you need to have somebody on standby? When it is during standby, how long does it take to answer a ticket? That's another one. Like, we can have a support system. When I worked for an MSP, we used to have tickets sit for like hours on end because maybe the one guy that knew how to fix it wasn't available. Like, that becomes, then you have a ticket waiting and you have the update hell is what you have. It's just like, I need an update. Any update? Is there an update? And you just keep pinging, hoping someone's going to answer. And then by the time they answer, it's 2-3 hours later. So those are 2 very, very big things, is from a support perspective, making sure that you have the 24/7, 365 SLAs wrapped around it, especially if you have a smaller team and you want to make sure that you have that uptime and availability. And then another one that you want to talk about is what is the path of least resistance, right? What does a migration look like? That, I think a lot of people forget. They're like, oh, I'm just going to take my application and move it to wherever I need it to be. Well, each provider functions differently. So make sure that when you're looking at a provider, they're not just whatever the new hotness is for the week that someone saw at a conference. Make sure that it's actually something that's going to work. And again, not add a lot of complexity into your already complex app, right? The less complexity, the easier the migration, et cetera, et cetera. And with that, how much control you need with that complexity, right? Hey, we're bringing this in and we're going to come to you as a provider. What do I need to do, or what do I need to know? Is there middleware involved? Is there a piece or part that we're not using today that we're going to have to start implementing? And what's that going to do to our application? Will there be a performance degradation? Am I adding this additional piece? Right? Those are the things that you want to do when you're vetting these orgs, because those key points will save you a lot in the long run, make the migration smoother, and once you're migrated, again, your IT team will be well rested.
Also, look at the support tiers to see how much it differs depending on what tier you're on, as well as maybe also consider what the cost is. What are they showing you front and center? Are they actually showing you enterprise, their highest tier support plans? Then ask about costs, because you don't want to be blindsided by that when you go to talk with them about potentially getting the service, and then you find out that it's going to fall out of your budget because of just support.
Yeah,
is so exorbitantly expensive.
Right. And the ROI on all of it, right? We always want to make sure that whatever the provider is providing is going to, what it covers, right? So like the ROI. So like we'll use platform as an example. When you look at that, we're managing the CDN, we're managing the WAF, we're managing the infrastructure, we're managing the storage. We're also providing an application performance monitoring tool as well as a profiler on top of the stack. And all of that comes included. So with having just that large chunk, you've got edge, storage, and infrastructure, that's going to save a lot of time, right? And then having SLAs wrapped around all of that is substantial. And when you look at these providers, that's what you have to think about. Like, am I going to this provider and they're just providing the application layer? well, what am I doing about storage? Am I using an S3 bucket? Am I using Glacier storage? Like, what am I using there? Versus, okay, well, who's managing the edge? Am I doing that? Are they doing that? That becomes the conversation. Like, what pieces are they doing versus what pieces you're doing, and looking at the return on investment on those pieces. Good question. Like that one. All right. Any other questions? All right. I don't believe we have any more questions. So what I want to do is I just really quickly want to summarize a few key takeaways. So in regards to IT leaders moving away from hosting providers, specifically the visibility gap, right? Real business costs of operating blindly, transparency failures and their consequences. We need to look at those on a day-to-day basis and understand, like, when you're looking at new providers and looking at new cloud application platforms and PaaS and platforms, that you understand that how is this going to help you, and what can you see and what can you manipulate, as well as what can help you be better by moving to whatever this provider is. Choosing the right platform, scaling and optimizing infrastructure. Another big thing in this day and age, scaling is key. Do you go up? Do you go down? Do you stay stagnant? And then planning accordingly, right? Getting out of the traditional scaling dilemma of like more capacity often and increasing complexity. The automated scaling approaches, creating automation and processes, repeatable processes, and removing that layer so you don't have to worry about a lot of the little minutia all the time. And then really managing your infrastructure as code, right? Using those principles that make your scaling more predictable and available, right? And then finally, choosing the right platform, right? Again, letting your IT team sleep. That's the big one. We want to make sure that that hidden productivity tax of managing those complex infrastructures, keeping that in mind from a cost perspective, alert fatigue, right? Getting away from a ticket every 5 seconds for no reason, just to say everything is running smoothly. The features that reduce, cognitive load, right? Self-healing, intelligent alerting, right? Things that actually make your life better. And then again, calculating that true ROI of a platform, which includes your team productivity and the retention, and letting your person sleep on Saturday, right? So those are the key takeaways that we have with this, is that these are the things that need to be taken into account. And then when looking at providers, these are the things you have to think about with your application. So if you have any questions, comments, concerns, or emotional outbursts, feel free. We have a lot of documentation here at Platform SH and Upsun. You guys can look at that at length. We have a Slack channel. We have a Discord channel, that you guys can join if you want to hop in there and just, dig around, see what other people are talking about. But ideally, we are happy to always provide a custom solution based on you and your needs. So if you want, you can book, you'll probably see in the chat, you can book a complimentary one-on-one session with us via the Calendly link that's been shared in the chat. And you can talk to myself. We can bring Mike on, and we can have a candid conversation about what you're at and where you're at today, and maybe something the platform or Upsun can help you with. So these are the real key points. So Michael, thank you so much for being on this with me today. I look forward to dragging you to one of these again later in the year. I'm sure I'll find some reason to sink you into this. So, but again,
it's my pleasure. It was my pleasure to talk about this. If also want to highlight the Dev Center for Upsun. That's also a fantastic resource to look at if you're interested in the world of Upsun. It is the future.
It is the future for sure. And yeah, if you even if you just want to call us and schedule us a demo, again, use that calendar link and let's set up some time for sure. But again, thank you everybody for your time. Really appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll catch you on the next one. Thanks everybody.
See ya.